G'day, I'm Owen, and you've joined this week's edition of the Pub Test, where we are again continuing our Jack the Ripper suspect series. And in this one, we are considering the interesting case of William Bury. Now, I can hear some of you saying that's not how you pronounce the name. It should be pronounced bury, as in digging in the ground and burying something, because that's how it's spelt. Well, there's also other berries, but that's spelt differently. However, we don't sit on a jerry, we sit on a jury. I believe you put the capital B in front of it, it should be pronounced Bury, but we do live in the internet age, and I'm sure someone out there will respectfully and kindly correct me if I'm wrong. But for now, we are going to stick with Bury. And I hope I don't have to do any major edit to this one. Just as a warning, this one is a little bit heavy. Pretty much tragedy followed Bury's life everywhere he went, including pretty much everyone he met as well. So where does he fit into the Jack the Ripper saga? Well, he was born in 1859, and he was the youngest of a few siblings. And tragically, when he was 1 year old, his oldest sister passed away due to extreme epilepsy. Now, his mother didn't cope very well, which we can understand. But she went into a downward spiral and was put into one of the asylums for the mentally ill. Understanding that was the only mental health care you would receive back then, which is very, very tragic. But it's also reported that she likely was suffering from postnatal depression after having William as well. Now, his father managed to keep things going, but then in unbelievable circumstances, I don't know how to describe it, but he was involved in a carriage accident. So he was doing deliveries, something went wrong with this carriage, and he got run over and he was killed instantly on sight. So William's life did not start very well, and also his mother passed away in that asylum after a couple of years of being in there too. But fortunately, the family seemed to rally around and raise the surviving children. So not much is known about his upbringing, except we know at the age of 16, he got a job working in a clock factory in Wolverhampton. And he worked there for some time until in 1880 he got let go because he didn't pay back a loan to the company, whatever description that was. But this is the beginning of a pattern. But he soon picks up work with a lock manufacturer, and he works there for a few years, according to the records, until he's fired for theft. Now, not much is known what happens after this, but he pops up again in 1887, just selling goods on the street. But it's in October 1887 that he pops up in a suburb really close to Whitechapel, an adjoining little area. And he's selling sawdust for a man by the name of James Martin. And seems like a very odd thing to do, selling sawdust, but back then sawdust was a very important commodity for a bit of hygiene reasons. You can look it up if you like. But yeah, there was a market for sawdust, and he's now selling that for this person. But James also ran a accommodation house where women were able to charge for their company. But it was here that William meets a girl by the name of Ellen. And she had been working the streets, but she had come into a bit of fortune and received a little bit of an inheritance. Now, it wasn't like she could go retire in Tahiti, but it was enough that she could give up that line of work. Then she meets this charming fellow, William Bury, and they form a relationship and they get married. But James gets fired from his job because he didn't pay a debt that he owed his boss. So we have a bit of a pattern here. He's been involved in fraud a couple of times now, theft, Like you're working and then you're defrauding the place you're working for on more than one occasion. That should have been alarm bells for Ellen. But what should have also been alarm bells for Ellen is that it's said that not long after they were married, William attacked her and had a knife to her throat. Now, instead of getting out of that situation, and no judgment here at all, it still happens today with domestic violence that people are stuck in a situation, though she did have the means where she could have probably left because she had some money where she could have escaped that situation. Unfortunately, she chose the other way. She sold some of her bonds to pay the debt back to James Martin, and William got his job back. Now, this doesn't last too long, and eventually she sells up all the bonds she had. Now, these bonds were worth around £100 each, which in today's equation would be around 20,000 Australian dollars. So to convert that to US currency, that's about $3.50. No, I kid you not, it would be around the $12,000 and maybe £6,000 roughly. So it wasn't a small amount of money, and she had a few of these, and so they sold them up, went on a holiday, but also at some point here, William has bought a horse and carriage. So maybe the plan was he would go contracting as a carrier, which in those days was someone who delivered goods around the city. Now, it seems that he also had some experience in this regard. His father had been doing similar work, and maybe he also on the side was doing this line of work, which does make sense as we go through this discussion. But for some reason, the money runs out, and then William says to Ellen, we are going to move, which she doesn't want to do. So he tells her, I've got a job in Dundee, in Scotland. So she agrees to move. Before he goes, though, he tells someone else, I'm emigrating to Brisbane, Australia. And so for that trip, I need these 2 big wooden crates made, which he gets commissioned, and he takes these crates, his wife, and himself to Dundee. Now, when he gets to Dundee, he goes to the hardware store and buys some rope. Now, it's not long after living there that he goes to the police and says, my wife has taken her own life. Now, to the police's surprise when they get there, they find that Bury's wife, Ellen, had been strangled. But somehow parts of her body have ended up in these crates that he had commissioned before he left for Dundee. So they know that she hadn't taken her own life. So he now says, well, okay, hear me out. You're not going to believe this, but yes, she did take her own life. I was worried I was going to get pinned for it, so I didn't know what to do. So after a day, I started trying to make smaller pieces to fit into the boxes. Then I was going to hide the body, but I just got too squeamish. So I came down here and explained what happened, but I just didn't want to get into trouble. Well, the police don't believe it. So he goes to court. He's charged with murder of his wife. Now, here's an interesting little detail, though. At the trial, 2 medical examiners said that the person was strangled first, and that's undisputed, and then immediately the body was starting to be cut up and put in these boxes. But a 3rd medical examiner disputed that. He said, no, I don't see it that way. He goes, the marks to me suggest that it was done a day or even more later, these cuts. Now, because of this, the jury, or is it the jury? No, we'll stick with jury, said that we think he did it, or rather we know he did it, but we want to extend leniency because of the dispute in the medical evidence. We won't send him to the gallows, but we'll send him to prison for life. And the judge says, that won't quite fit with my plan. Is there any chance you guys could go back and reconsider this? And just thinking that perhaps all the medical examiners agreed, what answer would you come up with? So following that, they turn up and say, yep, he's guilty. And the judge goes, well, that's what I wanted to hear. So he sends him off to the gallows. We may wonder why the jury were trying to find a way to save Bury's life here, because they were searching for something. Well, William Bury was the last person executed in Dundee. So we see the people really weren't comfortable with sending people to the gallows anymore in that area. And we understand now why they were trying to find a way to spare this person of that punishment. So it was in April of 1889, William Bury was executed for the murder of his wife, Ellen. So how does he fit in as a Jack the Ripper suspect? Well, there's quite a few connections here. Mostly to start with, he was in the area during 1888. He was there for the entire time. He's also known to have slept with a penknife under his pillow, and he also had knives. Now, Martha Tabram, who is not officially a Ripper victim, it has been suggested that those knife marks on her were consistent with the penknife that they found with Bury. Also, in one of the Ripper victims, I believe it was Catherine Eddowes, he goes home that night and he is just super excitable, like adrenaline pumping through his veins apparently. And he was out every night when the Whitechapel crimes happened. And they ceased when he left for Dundee. And also the way he treated his wife's body was very similar to the Whitechapel crimes. But it gets a little bit more interesting as well. When the police searched his house in Dundee, well, they found 2 cheap rings and a blood-stained belt. And they know that the bloodstains were quite old. They could not have happened when he murdered his wife. And the 2 rings may recall from Annie Chapman the being taken from her fingers. Well, now they've found something similar in Bury's house. Now, if we could DNA test any of that and find a match, I think this would really ramp up suspicion on this particular person. But there's even a little bit more. Apparently in the house they were staying in, there were 2 graffiti markings. One on the door said, "Jack the Ripper is behind this door." And another one said, "Jack the Ripper is in the cellar." Some have said those markings were already there before they moved in. But if you moved into a house, would you want to keep that up there? Find it funny? I think you'd be removing that as soon as you possibly could. And what's more, on the day he's executed, he says to the person at the gallows, "You're going to be doing this to me?" Really highlighting the word "me." And it's suggested that he was implying he had more of a story to tell and he was wanting to delay this execution so they find out a little bit more about this person. But he does say, "Because you're going to hang me, I'm not going to tell you anything." And so it is suggested that he's implying he was Jack the Ripper, but he's not going to confess now. Now, Scotland Yard did get wind of some of this. And so initially they dismissed it and they said, no, not really our issue. It's not him. He's not Jack the Ripper. But something, and we don't know exactly what, got their attention. So then they send 2 investigators up to have a chat to him before he is executed. And he gives them absolutely nothing. Now we see that he only did really care about himself. He was in the Whitechapel area. Officially, the murders stopped when he left. And it's, as stated, implied that he was saying he could have been. So have we actually solved this? Well, let's look at some dissenting viewpoints. And we'll work backwards. Firstly, the last thing he says is to this person at the gallows, implying that there's more to his story than what that person knows. I don't see that as being very important or credible at all. And that's because we all have an inflated opinion of ourselves. Like, I started a YouTube channel and I thought I won't be able to walk down the street in my small town. I'll be inundated with people wanting to take selfies and I'll have to sign autographs and I'll be carried down the street being hailed a hero. And that has not happened at all. In fact, I don't know if anyone's even seen any of these videos from my town. And if they have, they just don't care. I could hardly walk down the street and say, you can't do this to me, because I'm important. No. And the person at the gallows, I would suggest, and I could be wrong here, but I would suggest that they would not even want to know anything about this person. Would you read the paper? Because if you had to do that job and you then thought, maybe this person is innocent, they didn't do it, well, that puts you in a really awkward situation. And what is more, and I found this fascinating digging a bit further into it, it was during this year that what I would call a parliamentary committee had been started because of the actions of these executioners. Now, it's not that they were doing anything wrong whilst they were performing their job. It was what they were doing before and after. There was a parliamentarian by the name of Lechmere, not Charles Lechmere / Cross, who many people think was Jack the Ripper, but a person of the same name, did this big speech about it. And just summing up some of what he was saying is that we don't want to take authority away from the local establishments, but we do have a problem with the people performing the executions in that they're getting a bit wild the night before they have to perform a job. So they're having a few drinks and having a good time. And it gets worse the night after they've done this as well. So they've done their job and then they've gone to the pub and they're really hooking in. Now, for me, I can understand if you were doing that job, why. In fact, I would turn up and I'd expect the publican to say the first one's free because you're going to be having a lot. And I'd be saying no one talk to me until after my third one. But you see, the thing was, these executioners were just doing this as a side hustle. They were on a £20 retainer a year and paid £10 for every job they did, which was a good amount of money back then, but you could make more money doing something else. So this was something they did on the side. So him being Bury, talking to the executioner like he was important or cared, either he totally misunderstood the situation or had a higher opinion of himself than necessary. And Scotland Yard did send people up to talk to him, and he had every opportunity. He didn't have to wait till that last moment to try and get a reprieve of the death sentence. He could have spoken to them before, and he did make a deathbed confession. A couple of days before he was executed, he confessed to the murder of his wife and explained how he did it. Yes, she didn't take her own life as he claimed. No, he did it. So why in that moment would you not confess to these other crimes as well? And lastly, And this one I find perhaps the most damning of all, because the others could be circumstantial. You could explain things a bit different. Because he says to the police, I was too squeamish to chop her up and put her in these boxes. Now, these boxes he commissioned, and it would seem that that was the plan for the boxes. He wanted them so he could perform this crime. But then when it came to the actual action, he just couldn't go through with it. Which would be strange if he was the Whitechapel murderer, because where did this squeamishness all of a sudden come from? So there is a strong case for Bury to be the Ripper. He did not respect women. He was a domestic violence perpetrator and ended up taking his wife's life. He carried knives. He was in the area. But there's other questions, as we've raised. Is he high on the list? Well, many people think so. So what do you think? Do you have more evidence? Put it down there in comments. Be very interested in what you have to say. For me, it's not impossible that this person could have been Jack the Ripper. I would need those other questions answered, though, because it does raise doubt in my mind. And it is such a shame that we don't have the DNA on those rings and on that belt, because that would either definitely show that he didn't do it or most likely prove that he did. Because in fact, the evidence was presented to some court people, and they said, with all that we have, it would make a strong case that he would be convicted of the crimes. But as we know, that doesn't necessarily mean he did it, because innocent people can go to prison as well. Not that he's totally innocent, but did he do the Whitechapel crimes? I'm not too sure. But thank you very much for watching, and if you do enjoy this sort of thing, then subscribe so you don't miss all the videos. I'm Owen, you've been watching The Pub Test, and we'll see you on the next one.